Victory on the battlefield is not achieved by swords alone. Victory comes from timing, speed, and shock. When the enemy stands firm in formation, they believe they are safe, but the real danger arrives when the ground begins to tremble. This is cavalry shock tactics. The purpose of heavy cavalry is not just to fight. Its purpose is to break the enemy's courage, their formation, and their morale. When horsemen charge at full speed, it is not merely an attack. It is a psychological shock. The weight of the horses, the shine of armor, and the rising dust in the air leave the enemy no time to think. A perfect shock attack always comes at the right moment, not too early, not too late, often aimed at the flank or the center, where the enemy is weakest. The moment cavalry collides, enemy formations collapse, shields fall, lines break, and chaos takes over. That is the moment when the course of battle changes. History proves this again and again. Those commanders who understood cavalry shock tactics turned the impossible into victory. This is not just about strength. It is about strategy, discipline, and perfect coordination. That is why it is said, a perfect cavalry charge can end a battle in minutes. Victory on the battlefield has never depended solely on numbers, nor has it depended on raw strength alone. True victory is achieved through thinking, timing, and choosing the decisive moment. Every battle reaches a point, a single moment, when everything can change, and very often, that moment is the cavalry charge. When the enemy stands in tight formation, shield to shield, spear to spear, they believe they are an unbreakable wall, but history has proven again and again that no wall can stand for long against shock. The true purpose of cavalry shock tactics was never simple destruction. These tactics were designed to break the enemy's will, their discipline, and their state of mind. When horsemen advance slowly, then suddenly surge forward at full speed, it is more than a physical assault. It is a psychological attack. The ground begins to shake. Hooves strike the earth like thunder. The clash of armor, the flash of weapons, and the clouds of dust rising into the air create fear in the enemy's heart, even before contact is made. A perfect cavalry shock attack is never random. Behind it lies careful planning, a deep understanding of terrain, and patience to wait for the enemy's weakness. A wise commander never sends cavalry into a blind frontal charge. He waits until the enemy is tired, until their formation loosens, until their attention is focused elsewhere, and then he gives the signal. That is the moment cavalry moves, from the flank or straight into the center, where a single crack can destroy an entire army. The instant cavalry collides, enemy shields begin to break, spears lose balance, soldiers fall, not only under the weight of the horses, but under the realization that control has been lost. Chaos is born, and in war, chaos is more deadly than the sword. When a soldier sees the man beside him fall, when the line begins to collapse, his mind stops fighting and focuses on only one thing: survival. That is why cavalry shock tactics can end battles within minutes. The enemy turns to flee, and a fleeing army is almost impossible to save. History remembers many great commanders who built their victories on this principle. They understood that speed and surprise can be more powerful than steel. But cavalry shock has one unbreakable rule. If the timing is wrong, the same cavalry can be destroyed. That is why discipline is essential. Every rider must know when to strike, when to turn, and when to charge again. The perfect use of cavalry shock tactics is never limited to a single charge. It is a sequence. First comes the shock, then the pursuit, and finally denying the enemy any chance to regroup. This is an art, and not every commander can master it. When cavalry is used at the right place, at the right time, With perfect coordination, it does more than win battles, it creates history. That is why when we look at ancient wars, we do not see only swords and horses. We see human psychology, fear, and the importance of decisive moments. Cavalry shock tactics remind us that wars are not won on the battlefield alone. They are first won in the mind. And when shock is delivered perfectly, victory becomes unstoppable. Victory on the battlefield has never depended solely on numbers, nor has it ever relied on brute strength alone. True victory is forged through planning, discipline, timing, and the ability to recognize the single moment when everything can change. Every battle, no matter the era, reaches a critical point, a moment when formations strain, when morale begins to crack, and when one decisive action can determine the fate of thousands. Very often, throughout history, that decisive action has been the cavalry charge. When an army stands firm in formation, shield locked to shield, spears leveled forward, confidence runs high, the soldiers believe they are protected by discipline and order. They believe they are an unbreakable wall. But history tells a different story. No formation, no matter how disciplined, can withstand shock forever. Cavalry shock tactics were never designed for simple combat. Their true purpose was not merely to kill, but to break the enemy's formation, to break their morale, and most importantly, to break their will to continue fighting. When cavalry advances slowly, maintaining control and spacing, the enemy watches, waiting, preparing. But when that controlled advance suddenly transforms into a full-speed charge, the battlefield itself seems to change. The ground begins to tremble. Hooves strike the earth with thunderous force. Armor clashes and glints beneath the sun. Dust rises into the air, blinding vision and choking breath. Before the first impact is even made, fear begins to spread. This is the psychological power of shock. Human beings are not machines. Even the most disciplined soldiers are vulnerable to overwhelming sights and sounds. A wall of armored horses charging at full speed creates an instinctive reaction. Fear, hesitation, doubt, and hesitation in war is fatal. A perfect cavalry shock attack is never accidental. It is the result of careful observation and patience. A skilled commander studies the terrain, the weather, and the enemy's behavior. He waits for fatigue to set in. He waits for gaps to appear. He waits for overconfidence. Most importantly, he waits for the precise moment when the enemy is least prepared to respond. A reckless frontal charge against fresh infantry can lead to disaster. History is filled with examples where cavalry was destroyed due to poor timing and arrogance. That is why wisdom matters more than bravery. The ideal shock attack often strikes from the flank, where shields are angled forward and reaction time is limited, or it targets the enemy's center, where a single breakthrough can unravel the entire formation. When cavalry finally collides with the enemy line, the impact is devastating. Shields splinter. Spears are knocked aside. Men are thrown to the ground, not only by steel, but by the sheer mass and momentum of horse and rider combined. In that instant, order collapses. And in war, collapse spreads faster than fire. Once a formation breaks, discipline vanishes, commands are lost in the noise, soldiers begin to act individually rather than as a unit. This is the birth of chaos. A soldier who moments ago stood firm now sees his comrades falling. He feels the ground shake beneath him. He hears screams, metal, and thunder all at once. At that moment, training gives way to instinct, the instinct to survive. This is why cavalry shock tactics have ended battles in minutes rather than hours. Once an army begins to flee, it becomes nearly impossible to restore control. A retreating force is no longer an army. It is a crowd, and crowds are easily destroyed. Many of history's greatest commanders understood this truth. They recognized that speed and surprise could achieve what prolonged combat could not. But cavalry shock tactics come with strict rules. If timing is wrong, if coordination fails, or if discipline breaks, the same cavalry that delivers victory can suffer annihilation. That is why training was relentless. Every rider needed absolute control over his horse. Every unit had to move as one. Every command had to be clear and immediate. The perfect use of cavalry shock tactics is not limited to a single charge. It is a carefully planned sequence of actions. First comes the shock, the moment of impact. Then comes pursuit, pressing the advantage, preventing the enemy from regrouping. And finally, consolidation, securing the battlefield, and ensuring the victory cannot be reversed. This combination of power, precision, and discipline is what turns cavalry into a decisive weapon. It is not merely force. It is applied force at the right place, at the right time, and in the right way. That is why cavalry shock tactics are remembered not just as military maneuvers, but as expressions of strategic mastery. When we look back at ancient and medieval battles, we are not simply witnessing clashes of steel. We are witnessing human psychology at its most extreme: fear, confidence, discipline, collapse. Cavalry shock tactics remind us of a timeless truth. Wars are not won solely on the battlefield. They are first won, or lost, in the minds of those who fight them. And when shock is delivered perfectly, with discipline and purpose, victory becomes swift, decisive, and unstoppable.